Well done.
Hello everybody. Can I just thank James Goss for these brilliant clips he's putting together, by the way. Brilliant. So we're here to talk about Who Through the Ages, and I'd like to invite my guests up one by one. First of all, the inside of a Dalek is known as a terrifying mass of bubbling hate, but in reality it's the rather gorgeous actor Nicholas Pegg. When the series came back in 2005, it was produced and later series produced by a man who oversaw Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, Billy Freeman, Catherine Tate, Elizabeth Sladen, and even my favourite, Kylie. And that is the wonderful Phil Collinson. Next up is a man whose single creative vision has not only given us the finest 25 minutes of television ever, and I really believe that, in the very first episode of Doctor Who, but he helped form the series which is still with us 53 years later, the very first director of Doctor Who, Waris Hussein. And now we have to top that. Now we have to top that with the next guest somehow. It's such an honour to have you here, Waris, as I'm sure you realise. The next guest not only brought back the series in 2005, but he turned it from what was possibly a slightly funny cult TV show and turned into, without a doubt, the most loved and cherished drama series in the UK and now across the world. It really is. And he's a man that's always been proud of his sexuality, and it's been part of a lot of the work he's done. And we are very proud to have him here, Russell T Davies. What a panel, I cannot believe what amazing people we have here.
Yeah, what diversity?
Yeah.
No women! No women whatsoever!
That's a good point, actually. Because we're going to talk about LGBT issues. I think because we're 5 gay men on the stage, we're often going to use the term gay when actually we're talking about inclusivity of everybody. So I hope we don't offend anybody by feeling that we're not addressing gay women, trans women, and so on and so forth. We're here to talk about all of that diversity, and I'm sorry if we use the wrong terminology at any point. That's not our intention. Just wanted to get it out first.
Go on.
Indeed. Bring up any issues you've got where we think it may have been wrong. Looking at those clips there, Nick, as a fan that growing up watching the series, and you're not quite old enough to remember all of it.
Not quite.
But a fair bit of it. Did you ever watch it and think, Doctor Who is a bit gay?
Oh, yes, is the short answer. I mean, those clips, wonderful, wonderful clips, and I could have sat all day watching this, but yeah, that wonderful villain, Tony Beckley, in The Seeds of Doom, he was a brilliant actor. He died terribly young. He died only a couple of years after that, 3 or 4 years after that. But I remember watching that one as a kid and finding him a terrifying villain, but I think even then realising that he was kind of enjoying it a bit too much, wasn't he? You know, as a character, I mean. As an actor, I'm sure he was as well. Harrison Chase, and that wonderful line, I could play all day in my green cathedral. I mean, how did he even get away with it? It's absolutely outrageous. He was a wonderful actor, of course, otherwise best known to most people, I suppose, as Camp Freddy in The Italian Job with Michael Caine. Quite a similar character, actually. But yeah, this kind of, that's like a Doctor Who version of a James Bond villain, and it just sort of, the campometer does get sort of...
Do you think that's what made you like the show?
Well, I don't think it's actually about, we all enjoy a bit of camp, but it's not actually about that. That's just the kind of fun, isn't it? I think that, for me, the sort of genuinely resonant sort of gay LGBT type aspect that Doctor Who has always had, and I don't think watching it when I was 8 years old I even realised this, but looking back on it now, is that it was always about the other ones, wasn't it? You know, the Doctor himself is an outsider, the companions, you know, in an unusual situation, but the stories, there's a sort of tradition in Doctor Who's story that it'll be about breaking away from the regime and going and finding the rebels underground, you know, and the one character who, I don't know, a story like the Sunmakers, to pull one out of nowhere, starts with them meeting this chap who's about to commit suicide because he's so oppressed by this regime, and they take him downstairs to meet the other strange people who've broken away. And, you know, you can get a bit sort of dewy-eyed about that sort of thing, but I think that's woven into the fabric of Doctor Who, is that it's about otherness and about the people who, the square peg, the people who don't fit into the thing, yeah.
Phil, do you think, I'm going to phrase this properly, I was going to say, does being gay define you? I don't mean people say there's Phil, he's gay, oh, and he's a TV.
Oh, they do that.
There he is!
Gay Phil, gay Phil. But do you think
All my life I know.
do you think being gay has shaped you and your career? Do you think the career choices you've done are because you're a gay man and you've grown up in that world, in that environment?
Well, yes, Doctor Who and Coronation Street. What can I say?
Well, that's camp rather than gay, though, isn't it? Is that the same thing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just think it is me, isn't it? It sort of is you. I am camp and I laugh a lot, and I'm naturally drawn to things that are camp and make me laugh a lot, I suppose. I don't know, but then again, I've made other drama that isn't camp and isn't funny, so I don't know, it's hard to answer that. Yes.
Will you tell people what your grandmother said when you joined a Doctor Who group?
Oh yes, she said. So I told my grandmother I was about 14 and I joined the Leeds local group of Doctor Who, and she said, what's this then? So I said, well, everyone sits round and they're all Doctor Who fans. She said, yes, I bet they've all got their winkies out under the table.
Did they?
Yes! He was a formidable old bird, I tell you.
How did she know?
That's the fascinating thing. That's the fascinating. It was the idea that there was sort of a load of, I was 14 and there were a load of men in their 30s. Who were all sitting round.
It's not the appropriate time to be
All with their
playing
winkies
that
out
you're
under the table.
But the weird thing is, if you'd gone to a football, if you'd gone to a football match as a 14-year-old boy and they'd be surrounded by men...
Nobody would have had their winky out.
Nobody would have had the winky out.
Can I point out-
Nobody would have minded, nobody would have made remarks about it, would they?
Can't believe you remember.
I love that story.
I should point out that Phil was playing with his turnip then, by the way. In case you were wondering that he was playing with his winky under the
Never heard it called that
Well,
before.
no, but I mean, I think a lot. I think you know, other people have said it, but in many ways, I think Doctor Who's responsible for me being in television because it's the first. Because I watched it and I read the books and I used to write stories of my own. And some of you probably know that you know I'd made Doctor Who films when I was a teenager, and you know, so it did sort of make it started the sort of part of me that makes stories up and is imaginative and all of that. I suppose, yes, if I think about it, yes, it did make me think about television in a different way because it was just. So it encouraged that in you, you know, it's such an imaginative programme, isn't it? You know, it's full of imagination. It always was. When you write from the very, very, very beginning, from the very first episode, it's all about imagining. It's all about taking yourself somewhere else that no other show had done, really.
Yeah. Warwick, turning to you and being a fan, I am going to say, An Unearthly Child, episode 1, is the best piece of television ever. It really is, I believe that. So thank you. Back in 1963, could you be out? Could you be an out man? Or not? Was that not possible in the TV environment or any environment?
As a director,
Yes.
absolutely not. First of all, I must make this point. I don't know whether any of you all saw the making of it with the Mark Gatiss script, Adventure in Time and Space. So that covered a lot of what actually happened, even though obviously for narrative purposes he had to dramatize certain things that did or did not happen. But he did imply in that scene, there was a scene where I'm in the bar not being served by the bartender, and Verity Lambert rescues me because I'm eyeing somebody across the bar. And that was an implication of what it meant to be gay in the 60s. So, to be honest with you, I was very, very concerned about how I presented myself in a very male-orientated BBC society where people wore cords, wore old-school ties, and welcomed you aboard as if you were getting onto a ship. So the fact was, in this very male organisation, being the very first British Asian to get the task of doing this job, I was much more conscious of trying to get this show on the road, and there was no question of my expressing myself in any other way. So basically, I would say it was not an easy situation. And it took me a long time to be able to be where I am right now. Thanks a lot to the gentleman here who when I saw Queer as Folk, I just thought, well, obviously the doors have now opened and no one can shut them. But at the time, in the 60s, you've got to understand it was not the thing to do. I was very much in the minority, and so was Verity, by the way. She was the first female producer. She had a lot of problems on her plate. A lot of people accused her of not having... They said, oh, well, she didn't walk into this job. The implications were there. We were a group... and basically, I said to Sidney Newman, who at that time... by the way, I must mention Sidney Newman, because he's never given any credit. He created this show, and whereas you've got Coronation Street and you've got EastEnders with the people who created it still given credit at the end, Sidney is a lost person. He created this show, he made it happen, and we were what I described to Verity one day. We were the Three Musketeers, because he was Canadian, he was Jewish, Verity was female and Jewish, I was Indian and not Jewish. But the point... So, you know, what do you do with it? You try your best, and what I'm amazed by when you say things like, first episode, I mean, it excites me and thrills me to know this is the effect it had, but I absolutely had no idea. When we were shooting it, we shot it on 4 cameras continuously. There was no... we had 3 tape breaks, and that was it. If someone died, then you could stop. But the fact is... and if William Hartnell kind of huffed and puffed his way through the part, well, the interesting thing was he used it. Yeah. So this absent-minded man actually was forgetting his lines. But it sort of created a character. But what I'm really trying to say is that we just struggled through it. And so I'm absolutely thrilled to know that it lasted and it gave birth to what we're now discussing. I mean, otherwise, I don't really know what to say about being gay at the time, because to be honest with you...
Can I just interrupt? Because it's kind of, there's some younger people, it's kind of worth pointing out that, you know, it sounds like a homophobic world. Your life was illegal as a gay man. It was against the law.
Absolutely.
To be visible, to kiss a man, to be with a man, in any shape or form.
Absolutely. And not only that, but in my cultural background, I was still living at home with my family. There was no way I could express myself with them or with my work. However, I will say to you, we used to watch shows being shot from observation rooms. There used to be monitors in darkened rooms, and I do remember someone touching me up one day.
In the BBC? In the BBC? Oh, never.
That clued me into the fact that there were more people in that building.
That Verity. She was a
Oh,
terrible.
she was bad. Do you know what I was about to say, William Hart?
There were people in that building who were hiding themselves, and one or two of them sort of we knew what was going on. Yeah. But when this guy touched me up and I said, excuse me, I said, what do you think you're doing? He went, oh, I said, no, look, listen, don't do it here. There's a whole lot of basement areas where you but I'm not going to follow you.
And of course, it's not as though when homosexuality was decriminalised that suddenly everyone went, great, this is cool. So, I mean, it took a long, long time, as you just said, Boris. I mean, things like Queer as Folk meant so much, broke down so many walls for so many people.
I would say that because of what you did and opened the doors, when I graduated from from Doctor Who, which thank God was my launching pad in all fairness, without that I don't know where I've ended up. But the fact is, because I did what I did, and the BBC suddenly woke to the fact that I actually could speak English, the fact is they put me into drama, and I did do one of the first few gay-themed dramas written by Simon Gray, who at that time was not known. And those tapes have all been destroyed. But the very first shot started with high-heeled shoes running and a long dress, and the camera pans up, and it's a boy who runs up to a car and apologizes for not knowing his lines, and the school teacher saying, well, you better be good next time. And it was all to do with the play, and the boy is playing a woman. And it started the whole play about the theme. So it did exist, but we did not have the opportunity to express ourselves.
So when, I'm sorry, when did you come out to work, or slowly?
It took me a very long time, and I did not come out in my work area until much, much later. I think it was in 1972, which was...
Well, it's not. You could have said 1992.
Well,
you could have, seriously.
No, but I was...
Well done.
I was actually talking about this, something... I came out at a time when I was actually doing a film and I was filming in Munich. And actually by that time I was involved with somebody in London in secret, and I met somebody in Munich, and that triggered off a whole series of incidents. And funnily enough, I'm actually, there's a script now, and we may be making it into a film.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's to do with growing up. But, yeah.
Brilliant.
You've just reminded me of I have a killer fact here to do with those clips that you just reminded me of it, was the wonderful actress Myra Francis, who we saw daubed with makeup slapping Bella Ward in the face in one of those clips, who played Lady Adrasta in Doctor Who. A few years before that, she was one half of the first ever, I think I'm right in saying first ever same-sex, but certainly first ever lesbian kiss on British television in a play called The Girl, and the other actress was Alison Steadman. So, and she's married to Peter Egan. There we are. That's all my Myra Francis face.
We Doctor Who fans like facts, so that's good. Russell, I wanted to talk to you. I was going to talk to you about do you feel you had a responsibility, but we kind of touched on that with the torture panel earlier on. But I feel with people like Boris thanking you for Queer as Folk, what do you feel your legacy is on Doctor Who and...
Oh, gosh, that's...
And from an LGBT focus, perhaps?
Well, I always feel like it's very, very nice when... It's lovely when people say things like that. I do feel part of a continuum of work, of a spectrum, because, you know, Stephen Moffat's now running it, and he's straight, and there's just as many lesbian and gay characters copying it, because that's what it's like to write in... If you're writing well, as I was saying, if it's good writing, then of course it's alive to all this sort of stuff. Of course you're alive to the real world. Look at us, here we are. I think that legacy will, goodness knows, Christian was a wonderful man, and there's no doubt he'll continue that. So I don't see it as a legacy as such. I just see it as a long, long string of work from, you know, in the old show in which we read gay and lesbian coding into it, and you know, whether that's just hindsight, whether it was there at the time or not, whether it was there with Harrison Chase or not. It's there, but whether we imbued it with that or not, and then people practically start to put it in. It's a funny thing. It's like we talked a lot about where it comes from, and we talk a lot about camp. And I think there's a danger sometimes that camp sounds like it's funny and silly. And camp is many things. Camp also allows the darkness and strangeness of Doctor Who, that terror that you feel. If you're fascinated in it, there's a lot to read up on camp. In some ways, the cheapness of Doctor Who created this thrill that we're talking about, because you had to make do with dark corners. You had to suggest, you had to create a Stone Age world in the corner of Lime Grove. And the fact you can't have huge open vistas, you have to concentrate on Old Mother, and creates a world in which that cheapness allows gaps in which your imagination floods in. I think Doctor Who has holes in it. It's porous. Anyway, Star Trek isn't. Star Trek, for example, which is a great show, but it's finished Star Trek. It presents a very finished world because it's expensive and it's on film, and there it is. It's all, they present it to you, that's our finished product. Doctor Who's kind of open and unfinished and porous, and that allows your imagination to flood in. All of that is camp. That's a camp process at work that is that's genius and wonderful and exciting, and actually is the reason why we have all grown up watching Doctor Who, because we not only put our minds into Doctor Who, it's a two-way process. Doctor Who then goes into your mind, and so that's why that stuff that you made in 1963, we're not kidding when we say how much we love it. It's like, it's entered our heads and it's part of the very way that we think, and that's a brilliant, wonderful thing.
Talking of alluding to things, Nick, as a fan of the whole of the series, do you think there's ever moments in its history where there could be some gay references in it? For example, I'm thinking of the relationship with Vivian Faye and one character in Stones of Blood and so on.
Stones of Blood.
Are they lesbians?
One of the few Doctor Who stories of the 70s or the early period where there are actually, I think, more female characters than male. So that's something in a star, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I think it's certainly there in that. I mean,
They live together, don't
that,
they?
that wonderful actress Beatrix Lehmann, who plays the professor in that, who was a real character in real life. She'd been in Berlin with Christopher Isherwood and done the most extraordinary things, and she brings that very sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say sort of, it's not a cliched sort of dykey thing or anything, but there is a kind of,
It's not cliche, it's very original.
no, exactly, no, yes is the short answer to that one, yeah, absolutely. I think you can, but of course, as Russell was saying, you can see what you want to see to a certain extent, can't you? Because it's ventilated.
If you want a Doctor Who fact, that was written by David Fisher, and I now live in a house which is owned by David Fisher's daughter, Kirsty.
Wow.
There we are. That's a tiny world.
That's
How about that?
That is a well, yeah, no, and as you said, the sort of proper Susan Sontag spirit of camp, which is a more complicated thing than just swinging handbags around and is manifested in all the way through Doctor Who. I mean, there's something about the relationship between what's the lady called in The Doom of the Cybermen? Kaftan. What kind of a name is that? And her servant Toberman. And there's just something, that's a woman and a man, but there's something so bizarrely sort of gay about, I don't know what I'm talking about, is it? But yeah, I see it all the way through.
Arch.
But Tomb of the Cybermen, incidentally, the first Doctor Who story that was screened after the decriminalisation of homosexuality, for what it's worth. Summer of 1967. I know that because I was born shortly after that. I was up there going, I'm not coming out until it's decriminalised. I'll stay out there for 18 months if necessary. I was born under the sign of the abominable snowman, actually. But what was the question? Yeah, I think
You've got Eldred in Hand of Fear who goes from female to male and so on and so forth, so there are lots of parallels, aren't there, throughout the series that you could draw on for the LGBT.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people have said this sort of thing today already, that the fact that Doctor Who is a programme which has fewer rules than, Coronation Street or Star Trek, because it's set in a universe that actually it has different, you can go to a planet where there's new rules that we've never encountered before, So because it's capable of sort of morphing like that, it means that there is the constant possibility, isn't there, for for anything to happen, for the Master to regenerate into a woman, for someone to, change their mind about all sorts of things, or change their form, or transition in whatever way. So I guess you could, there probably are people out there doing serious queer studies, theses about Doctor Who and its, entire allegorical gay LGBT nature, I guess, because you can certainly read the whole thing that way, can't you?
Yeah, definitely. Phil, I wondered, did you ever, how shall I phrase this, slip in something gay? So to speak. Did you ever think...
Often.
I'm talking about the
I'm here to tell you often.
So did you ever think, let's make this more camp or more gay or whatever?
No.
But you must have had moments when you're on set with Kylie, whatever, see I mentioned
Oh,
it.
we spent 5 years laughing, trying to, oh my God, it's the greatest job in the world for that. I mean, you're standing, in the street in Cardiff next to a 8-foot green Slidine. What else are you going to do? It's so funny, it is, and I think that's also part of, and maybe Boris would agree with me, but it's also, I think, part of the success of the show is that we all enjoy making it. And I think that comes out of the screen. I genuinely believe that. I mean, not every show is an enjoyable experience, but certainly Doctor Who is. And it encourages you to be creative, whatever your job is. You know, whether it's sitting in a Dalek or directing or writing it, just encourages you to be creative. It encourages you to think out of the box. It encourages you to think in ways that you don't have to on any other show, actually, because you're trying to make it. You know, you had a lot less money than we had, but we still didn't have enough money.
There's never enough money, is there?
And that encourages your imagination. But no, I don't think. No, never. We never sort of.
Never deliberately.
Never deliberately.
Can I tell a quick little story about John Barrowman? Again, something that came up in the clip.
Remember, there are children.
There are children. The bit where John Barrowman had to get naked in...
There are.
There are.
The bit where John Barrowman had to get naked in Bad Wolf, which was on the clips just like that. He did genuinely get naked, didn't he?
He did. And there was a shot.
There was a shot, absolutely.
His bare bottom.
But my abiding memory of this, and I hope Barnaby was there too.
I'm still traumatised.
I assume he was too, right? He must be. But basically, when something like that happens, understandably, for reasons of decency, you sort of, it was known as a closed set, isn't it? You sort of, everyone who doesn't have to be there gets asked to just, you know, go and have a cup of tea while we do this. And it's just whoever absolutely needs to be there, the director, the crew, and everyone else discreetly, you know, moves away. And quite right too. And that was one of those, you know, Joe Ahern, the director, was going around saying, you know, John's got to get naked in a minute, so we're all going. And we no, we'll go and get him. So this happened, and then John came in from his trailer with his robe on, you know, all ready to do the thing. And it was a great big cavernous hangar of a studio, wasn't it, that we used back then? And he came in with, and it's, you know, bigger than this room, the journey he had to do across to get to the studio. And he came and he said, guys, I'm doing the new scene, it's a closed set. Yeah, and we're all going, no, we're going, don't worry. And he went, yeah, it's a closed set, I don't want anyone looking. And he just dropped the robe. And then, slow as you like, naked as the day he was born, he just walked all the way across. Closed set, everyone, nobody looked. Famously shy and retiring John Barrowman.
John's very proud of what God gave. We're all testament to it.
No, those rushes exist somewhere. Terrifying. Maurice, An Adventure in Space and Time you touched on earlier. I mean, how did it feel to have someone like Sacha portray you? It must have been odd, but nice, I guess? Or did you have much of a rapport with him? Did you talk to him about your life at the time?
Yes. He's actually an extraordinary guy. He's a very good actor anyway. And he came to see me in London because he's from Manchester. And he speaks with a Mancunian accent. And when he came in, I said, Sacha, sit down, listen to me. This is how I talk. Are you going to be able to get this right? Because otherwise you're not going to be able to get me right. So he taped me, and he spent a lot of time. And I have to give him full marks, because when I saw the show, I thought, my God, he really has nailed the character. I mean, you obviously got to have a bit of leeway in this, don't you? And what he got was the slight implication, without being camp or limp-wristed or whatever, being the gay thing, but because it was implied by Mark in the script. Actually, in the original script, there was more. And I said, Mark, you know what? I think it's going over the top, because in those days, there was no way. I mean, he had me, the character, when I finally leave, the guy I've been eyeing in the bar, I'm saying goodbye to him, the doors of the elevator open, and there's this guy standing in there, and I get in and he says, going down. I said, no, Mark, you can't do that.
Damn you.
I know it's there.
We'd have kept that in.
We'd have kept that in, definitely.
Yeah, thanks, Maurice. We'd have been happy.
So, you know, but that was the nearest we got to that point. But I have to say, I really thought Sacha did me proud.
Yes.
What
He's
more can I
sexy
say?
as well.
Very, he is, and so hopefully, actually, this drama I just mentioned, he's agreed to do, much older now, and he said he's agreed to do it should it ever get made. So that's where the road is heading. But we've come together again on this particular project.
He's someone I'd like to see play the Doctor one day. I think he would do a great job.
Oh,
Maybe.
well, Is that a big hint somewhere?
No, I don't know.
Oh,
Not at all. Right, so I'm going to try and remind you of a story, and I hope you remember it, because it's much better coming from your lips. I remember you talking about being at a party once, where a woman came up to you and said she didn't like the Captain Jack character.
Oh, she did. I love that story. Yes. I was hoping it would be the story about the Lady Mayoress, but it's not that one.
I'm going to find a way to tell you the Lady
Yes,
Mayoress.
we'll come to that next step.
It's
brilliant.
But yes, it was at a friend of mine's wedding, Nicholas Schindler's wedding, a big, posh, rich Jewish wedding, and a woman came up objecting to the gay kiss. It was about midnight, and everyone was quite drunk, and so little short terrier of a blonde woman objecting to the gay kiss with Captain Jack, and the fact that her children are to watch this, and I just wasn't having it. I was just in that mood. I was normally standing going, oh, I'm sorry, oh, I disagree, and I think this or that, and that. I won't swear, but it's like, and I just went, I'm not having that. Who are you? You dreadful, ugly woman. It's like, and I was literally going, I'm going to get your name, I'm going to get your number, I'm going to phone up social services because they're living in a home of abuse, and I'm going to get them taken off you. And I literally, and she was going, I'm walking out of here. I was going, you're not walking out, I'm going to chuck you out of here. Get out. This wasn't my wedding. I was going to get out of this wedding. And she's going, I am going to go. I was going, I'm making you go. Get out. And then she went into that cloakroom bit. Were you there that wedding?
No,
The cloakroom bit. And she got her husband. Her husband's going on. I was going, I'm chucking her out. And if I'm chucking her out, you're getting out as well. And unbelievably, they went. I wouldn't have gone. They actually said, well, we're going. I was going, how did I do that? How did this? I wasn't having it for a second.
You were absolutely right, because she is a bad mother.
Yes, bad mother, absolutely. And those kids will be fine. They just go up and stupid mum like that. So you need never worry about that sort of stuff. But mad, isn't it? And look at that kiss. It's like half a second long. It's nothing. However, when Phil met the Lady Mayoress,
We have to have that story, Phil. Tell us the story.
Okay, and I was sitting on my hands down there on the first panel, because I do have to say that when we came here to make Doctor Who in 2004, we could not have made Doctor Who in any other place. I genuinely believe that. We just couldn't, because Cardiff was amazing, and they let us film in amazing places. They closed streets for us. We were allowed access to buildings that, I cannot tell you how supportive and amazing Cardiff was. And the first time we met the Lady Mayoress, we was at the Gay Pride day with Russell and Charlotte Church that we heard about earlier. And there was a hospitality tent, and it was absolutely pissing with rain. The whole day was pissing with rain. But this hospitality tent, anyway.
with a nice buffet.
Nice buffet, cold salads, and sort of those bain-marie things full of nice warm food, and we plumped for the salad. Our boyfriends went for the warm meal, and and we met the Lady Mayoress that day. She came across. She was a bit of a camp old bird, actually, and she was. I'm very pleased to meet you. Thank you for coming and bringing this to Cardiff. It's great. Blah blah blah. And the show hadn't actually gone out by this point. She was charming. Anyway, by the next day, my boyfriend was ill. On the Monday, it was on the front page of the local paper, that the council, because she wasn't just there on her own, she was there with several other council members, had been poisoned by this hot, faulty bain-marie full of chicken curry or whatever it was. And they'd all been laid low. They'd had to cancel their council meeting or something. So about a month later, we were doing a dinner at the. I'm going to have to speed up now because it's a long story. we were doing a dinner. We were doing a dinner in celebration of children in need, and it was a magnificent event. We were there, but
It's the Galactic dinner, wasn't it?
the Galactic dinner. So Camille was there, Billy, David, everybody was there, Noel, and we did a sort of wedding lineup. So as the guests came in, they got to shake hands, and they came along the line, and I was at the end, and I sort of shook hands with the Lady Mayoress, and I said, "Oh, I've met you actually. I met you at the Pride dinner." So don't mention the Pride dinner to me. you know what happened, don't you? I said, oh yeah, you were all poisoned. Poisoned? I disgraced myself in the council chamber. So that was it. She shut herself in the So that was the second time I met her. And I blame you, she said. So then the third time we met her, they were opening the Doctor Who exhibition in Cardiff Bay. And there was a little party, and it was probably a couple of months later. It was a party thrown, and she was there. So she comes up, gold chain and everything, and she's glaring at me across the room because I pointed her towards the faulty Bain-Marie. And she does a little speech about how marvellous Doctor Who is, how great it is, and it's been great coming to this city, and blah blah blah. And she has to press this button, you see, and there's a giant top hat up there. And as she presses the button, you see, this is sort of a little pyro goes off, and all this glitter's supposed to come out. Well, they packed too much pyro into the top hat. So she presses the button. This is the biggest bang you've ever heard. And this top hat detaches and heads towards her. And she has to sprawl out. She has to sprawl out on the floor, hit the floor to miss this top hat whizzes over her head.
She would have been decapitated.
So then the next time I met her, and this is the fourth time now. She hit the floor. So David and Billy are turning the lights on in Cardiff. And I'm sitting in the trailer with them, and there's a little knock on the door. So I go to open the door, and it's the Lady Mayoress with these two little children. And she goes, oh, it's you! Hello? Not only have you been there when I've been poisoned, not only has that top hat come heading towards me, what's that? Why have you put a zip in the Lady Mayoress's head now? Wherever I go in Cardiff now, people shout, show us your zip. God bless the Lady Mayoress. Very sweet. That was your zip. Sorry, that went on too long.
That was worth every moment. Russell, you haven't really spoken about Doctor Who 7 years since you left. But thank you for gracing us today. I mean, why? Why have you chosen to? Is it something important to you that?
I think this is very important, and Lisa told me they wouldn't get funding if I didn't appear. I think that's a very good cause. I do. LGBT History Month, marvellous work is being done, and truly, and in schools and with education and stuff like that. It's a great thing to support.
Brilliant. Let's open up to the floor. I'm sure you've got questions for people here. And we've got our roving mics. So, right, a hand down here. Sorry, I have to make you run down here. There's a gentleman with a blue T-shirt on. Wonder what she's up to now. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
This is a question for Wallace about early Who. It's always struck me as weird. You've got a very successful show, the lead actor becomes too ill to continue. So you'd expect the show to finish at that point. Who had the idea for regeneration, and how on earth did you all find the courage to go ahead with such... We now take it for granted, but at the time it was an extraordinary step to take.
Well, I wasn't the one to make that decision, but the fact was that you probably know this because of the drama that was shown in that show. The BBC was going to close it down, and it wasn't just a polite across-the-desk situation with Sidney Newman talking to one person, the controller. There's a whole table full of people who were against the show. So it started off on a very bad foot, in the sense that, and you also know that the first episode was interrupted by Kennedy's assassination. I mean, this thing could have died a death. And the fact was, the regeneration factor was because when William was going downhill, they thought, close it down. But again, the whole idea of regenerating it again was Sydney's. It wasn't ours. And I was by that time already involved elsewhere because I'd just done 7 episodes. I'd done the Marco Polo episodes, and I was about to leave anyway. But those, as you probably know, have disappeared. No one ever seen them again. But the fact was, I think it was a brilliant idea to say, don't kill the show, regenerate. And that's what this all has happened. This is what the core of this show is about, is the flexibility, including the narrative and the fantasy that goes with it. The idea that you can regenerate somebody into different shapes and forms as the main character. But I will say one thing, that if it hadn't been for Russell T reviving it, as we all know, it had begun to slow down. And I personally had left it, so I'm not in a position to comment beyond the fact that I was beginning to feel that it wasn't the show that it should be. It was beginning to down the vine. You regenerated it, and that's why we're talking about it now, because at the time, it went through a whole series of, I think, downhill concepts. But
It was unloved. It was unloved by the people.
it was unloved, and we felt this. I mean, I was walking the corridors at the time when it was about to die, and you never felt so icky. You know, you go into the BBC bar, which in those days was the place to be seen, and you'd sort of hide behind people because you didn't quite know how they were treating you. There were all these superior people doing all sorts of major dramas, and there was this little show in the sticks, which was Lime Grove Studios, which is probably the most dreadful building you could impose on anybody. And here we were creating fantasies. I mean, literally, sandstorms in the corner of Studio D Lime Grove, an episode, the Marco Polo episodes, which, by the way, interesting enough, I don't know whether any of you remember this, but Marco Polo had an opponent called Tagana, and I think there was a real frisson going on there, you see. Darren Nesbitt, who was playing Tagana, had a wonderful kind of really sly way of being sexual. And, you know, with his hair slicked back and all this leather, my dear, you know.
I do know.
So he and Marco Polo had quite a few wrestling matches and sword fights, and I kept thinking, you know, this could be something. It's rather like the story when they did Ben-Hur and Charlton Heston was not told that his opponent was going to play it gay. So, you know, because those days you didn't play it those days. But you know what I'm saying? There was an undercurrent. So, anyway, that's a lengthy answer to your question.
But talking of regeneration, we know we're on the cusp of another new Doctor, and I'm sure we'd all like to consider there could be a gay, even lesbian actor cast in that role. Russell, do you think the general public would accept an out gay actor as the Doctor?
Well, yes, we are the general public as well. And I do think so. Yes, I think when all these think pieces are written, these both on the Daily Mail and the bloggers, that's not what society thinks. Yeah. Do you know, it's funny. I was reading the other day about the decriminalisation of in 1967, the first debate in the House of Lords which had the bill had 3 readings, 1966, 67 about decriminalising homosexuality, and the stories often told through the newspapers, through the media, for want of a better phrase, of how difficult that was to get through the House of Lords. You actually go and read Hansard, you actually read and go what was said in 1967, got through very easily. 3 people like Monty and a couple of other people stood up and made ridiculous speeches about how vile homosexuals are. That's all that's remembered. That's all gets quoted, the terrible things were said at the moment. There's like 300 other lords sitting there who voted and they go, fine. Of course we repeal those laws, that's fine. So there's a danger always of history being remembered by those loud, stupid voices. That's not what the general public is. Despite all the terrible votes that are being passed, I do not believe that's what the general public is. And I think they would be, I think most of them wouldn't blink.
Well, you were saying on a panel earlier on, Russell, that there is we are always that far away from having these things taken away from us.
Things are true.
And there's also a danger, I think, of assuming that history that is progressively progressive.
Yes.
But actually, the 60s was a very liberal and progressive time for a number of reasons, and that's when that happened. It's also when capital punishment was abolished and so on and so forth. And actually, diversity, in some ways, in Doctor Who was better in the 60s than it then was in the 70s in places. There are several Jean Pertwee episodes where Jo is the only female character in the entire story. And you think, crikey, and as for people of colour, the 1960s was actually kind of better at that. And now it's obviously things have got a lot better more recently. But yeah, it doesn't just get better and better, does it? It kind of fluctuates, as with what's happening over the pond. Anyway, yeah. But that's another story.
Any questions from this side? Anyone got their hand up over here? Oh, there's one over there. This man works on Doctor Who. This man works in the art department of Doctor Who.
Hello. He's got a good job.
Yes.
Hi. Edward was just saying about could we ever have a gay actor playing the Doctor. We nearly did right at the start. So with Geoffrey Belden, who would have presumably kept a secret at the time, but is quite open about it these days. And about 10 years ago, Russell suggested Russell Tovey as a potential Doctor.
Or anything.
Nurse, Doctor.
And I was talking to, two completely different conversations with different people recently, and I mentioned about how Russell Tovey had been suggested as a new Doctor, and we talked about some of the other actors who played the History Boys, and both occasions we came to Sacha Darwin, who played the young Warris, who you were talking about just now as well. So I just think it's nice these days that out of all those actors, we went for the gay one or the Asian one, and in this day and age, that's the way it could go.
That's positive discrimination, which has its benefits and not as well. So I don't know. I will say, because you've mentioned Sacha, and I've mentioned this to Warris, he played the young Warris. I've seen pictures of you, young Warris, and he's not quite as handsome as you. Very close.
That is...
Very close.
Well,
but
I think we keep talking about young Morris. I have to say, Doctor Who started 50-something years ago, and you directed the first episode. Have you got a painting in your attic? You look better than I do.
It was an honour, actually. A couple of years ago, back in 2014, we had you on set, and Warris regaled everybody with stories about working with people like Bette Davis and so on and so forth. And it's just lovely that you've never left the show.
That's very true.
I've always followed it from a distance, I mean, the reality is it's like a parent. You gave birth and now it's flown the nest and it's gone and he's gone and she's gone.
And it's gay.
It's gone. And it's
Okay, time. We got time for one more question. Burning question. Yes, down there, Phil has got a question. If you take your time. You could have, yeah.
Why do you think Doctor Who and obviously the spin-offs are so good at including LGBT characters and doing it so effortlessly when other major franchises feel like they're shoehorning them in by any means possible?
Oh, interesting question. Russell, I feel like it's directed.
It's interesting. It's not bad. It's I know what you mean. I kind of watched this. I was watching Supergirl the other day, which I don't watch often, and her sister was having a bit of heartbreak with a woman, and she didn't. I mean, if it is shoehorned in, I'm glad it's being shoehorned in because it's better than it not being there. I actually rather enjoyed that little story. I came to watch For the Handsome Men, and then there were two women making out, and I was like, well done, Supergirl. So I think maybe what you're talking about is straight production teams, which and a lot of production teams make television badly, full stop. Let's be honest, if they're doing a divorcing couple, they do the divorce quite badly. If they're doing a drug problem, they do the drug problem quite badly. That's kind of, television is made very fast and very cheaply, and that not everything will work. So it's much better than it was, though. I don't kind of want to join in with the wholesale slagging off of an industry that I think is trying, could always do better, and that's why we will always try better. The young people, I want to say, it's so chuffed today to meet Crystal there. It was like the future of this kind of programming, and not programming, I meant the word programming, the future of this kind of thought, how out and how proud and how imaginative and creative you can be. So I'm quite optimistic, and I don't want to worry that much. I think with people like Crystal there, the future's good.
Brilliant. Let's embarrass Crystal.
That feels like an appropriate moment to end.
I have a very quick question, actually, if you don't mind. Before we have our break, who's been your favourite LGBT character in Doctor Who and its Whoniverse?
Oh, crikey. What are you looking at me? Oh, God. Okay. Well, gosh, you put me on the spot. Just because he was the one who just really kicked the door open 12 years ago, whenever it was. I've got to say Captain Jack, haven't I? I mean, yeah. But there's plenty more. I've got to go first. That's
Yes, that's lucky. Lucky. Oh, fifth.
I'm going to say, because he was my favourite character when I was a little boy, Alpha Centauri.
Yeah. Oh, and Harrison Chase, obviously, goes without saying, playing all day in his Greek funeral.
You can't have two. There's five of us. I'm going to say that woman in the Twin Dilemma who says, "May my bones rot in hell."
Oh, brilliant!
She's mad. She's wonderful. Brilliant.
Your favourite LGBT cat is there one?
Oh.
No. I'm sticking with my theory that Sarah Jane was bisexual. So I'm going to go with Sarah Jane.
On that note then, guys, a big round of applause for our panel.